Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
What's going on?
Yeah. You know what? Not much. It's just been kind of a standard week, but a week in which I feel just a little bit lighter. The weather's getting a little bit better. Last week, Shelly and I got to do some kayaking, and that was fantastic. And yeah, we're just kind of cruising along. So how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I just finished a written interview for a job that I'm applying for. And, the best possible outcome of that sort of experience is that writing out your answer to the questions makes you want the job more.
Mm.
And that was very much my experience. It will be a sad, sad moment if I don't get the job, though, of course, I want the best person to get the job, but I also want to be the best person. So, but yeah, writing out my answers to some of their interview questions was really just caught my imagination and I was excited. So I am energized.
That's great. Now, this is the engineering consulting company that you talked about a few weeks ago, right?
Yes, I did not remember having said that, but yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So I am hopeful. Who knows? Depending on the timeline of when we release these things, if I got the job and some of my new coworkers were to hear about our podcast, this might be one of the first episodes that they listened to. So
At least you've said
that'd be
good
interesting.
things. Boy.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, well,
like
that's
you
not what you
said,
said offline, but whatever.
No, it's not. Well, then I didn't have an audience. No. No, it seems like it's an amazing organization and I would love to be a part. So
That's
here's
awesome.
hoping.
Yeah,
But
good.
I'm guessing you didn't call to talk about interviews. So what did you call to talk about?
Yeah. All right. So I am finally reading Dallas Willard's The Divine Conspiracy. And
Wow.
yeah, so this is a book you read quite a long time ago.
No,
Oh, really?
no. This is a book I have attempted to read maybe a dozen times.
Oh,
And it's a pretty heavy book and requires a lot of focus and it's pretty lengthy.
yes.
I do not think I have ever finished it. I think I've gotten, so this is periodically over the years, I've brought up this category of book, the best book I've never read.
Yeah.
This is currently my best book I've never read.
Okay. All right. Well, so this is funny because this is probably the best book I thought I had read. Yeah. At some point, I think what happened is I read Dallas Willard's Renovation of the Heart. And then when I went to Goodreads and tried to mark it, I somehow marked The Divine Conspiracy as having been read. And I own the book. And so I just I even marked it on my Audible as having read it. But I don't know. I don't think I've ever read this. So
Yeah. Funny, Renovation of the Heart is one of the best books I've ever read.
oh, for sure. Yes.
It's just breathtaking. I've actually read it twice. The first time I read it was when I lived in Massachusetts. We were doing a bunch of renovation, actually, ironically, on our house. And the treadmill was in the kitchen. And so I very clearly remember listening to this book on the treadmill in the kitchen of my house in Boston.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, but we're not talking about that book.
No, we're not. So Divine Conspiracy. This is Dallas Willard's take on the Sermon on the Mount. And I'm about halfway through it, but I've gotten past the point at which he talks about the Beatitudes. And yeah, you know where I'm going now.
Yes, I do. Because I've tried to read this book literally like 10 times. I have read that chapter like 10 times because it's fairly early on in the book. It's maybe chapter 3 or something.
Right. And he has a very interesting take on the Beatitudes. He argues that over the course of history, we have often argued that the Beatitudes are a set of moral guidelines or moral imperatives that mark the people who will be accepted into the kingdom of heaven. And so it's like here's your list. Go be these types of people. And he's saying that's not the way to interpret this. In fact, this is instead the kingdom of heaven being announced to even the least of these, and saying the kingdom of heaven is available to everyone, literally everyone, including the marginalized. And so he takes the Beatitudes just in a completely different direction than I think I've normally heard it.
That totally makes sense to me. And I feel like he really sets up, you're right, a different way of looking at this. So I'm curious, what's the real question that you're asking here?
Yeah, I want to know, are the Beatitudes a set of moral guidelines to which we should aspire? Or are the Beatitudes announcing the good news of the kingdom to the least of these? And, Willard seems to make it an either or and say it's either this way or the other way. And I've definitely heard it the way he denies, but the way he affirms just doesn't seem to fit either.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like maybe he's on to something that's making a really great point. But one of the things I'm always interested in, whenever something is set up as an either or, I'm always going to ask, is there a third option?
Right. And that third option doesn't appear very clear to me either. Like, I'm not sure what that third option would be.
Yeah, no, me either, which leads me to think that, let's start off reading the text. Does that make sense?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'd love to get just an idea of what it is we're looking at, but I don't want to start in chapter 5. I actually want to back up to the very end of chapter 4, starting in verse 23, because this may actually set the stage for Dallas Willard's argument. So it starts off like this in the ESV. And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, and those oppressed by demons, and those having seizures, and the paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. It's like the night of the living dead was descending upon Jesus because like all of these people from the entire region are just showing up. And these are the cursed ones of the day.
Yeah, it's, I love the fact that you're using that word curse because that's exactly it, right? Like Jesus is about to begin with the blesseds, the Beatitudes.
Instead of the curseds, which he kind of should have started off with.
Yeah, absolutely. That these people, because these are if I'm remembering correctly, virtually all of these people, if not all of them, are genuinely unclean according to the Mosaic law. Yeah. Not just according to some sort of tradition. They're actually unclean. They, by God's law, can't enter into the religious life of the people of God.
Without first being cleansed.
Correct. As they currently are. And that leaves it a fascinating place for Jesus to then begin this most famous sermon, which I have all sorts of questions about it as a sermon that we can get to later on in the conversation. But are you ready to hear the Beatitudes? With all that in mind.
Well, right. And it is really with all that in mind. I mean, verse 1 says that Jesus saw the crowds. And so in light of the crowds, he sat down to start teaching. And so we have to picture this crowd, this night of the living dead crowd all around him as he's giving this sermon.
Well, not only that, it's not one of the first things that comes to mind when you say that. Is this the night of the living dead or is this the recently healed?
Oh, it's got to be a mixture of both, right? Again, like a third option.
Yeah. So, but this is a place where a third option seems odd to me. So Jesus is in the middle of healing tons and tons of people. A whole bunch of people are like lame and hurting and in agonizing pain. And he's like, hey, I've got this 25-minute sermon, and then there'll be an altar call, and I'll call you up and you can get healed then. Like, it feels to me like it would be more consistent with Jesus to have done the healing and then to teach. Again, without wanting to be dogmatic about it, I'm not saying 100% of all healings were done in this context before any teaching was done. But it seems like he was doing a lot of healing. And so you've got at least a lot of folks who maybe it would be appropriate to say the physical ailments have been dealt with. The spiritual ailments have been dealt with, but they're still dealing with the emotional chaos that those things caused. You know, I was a shamed leper up until 5 minutes ago.
Well, and I actually, because one of these Beatitudes, which we still haven't read, is...
we will someday.
We will someday, right. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I wonder if these are the people who have been physically healed, and now they're like, okay, I can finally participate in kingdom activities. I am so desperate to do that they don't go home after their healing. They stay with Jesus. And Jesus is maybe even walking through the crowd and touching people on the shoulder as he's indicating each of these blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. And just here's example A. Well, I touched their shoulder. And maybe some of these people were thirsting for righteousness and just experienced their healing and just decided to stay with Jesus.
Yeah, I was picturing the same thing when Jesus said, blessed are the meek. What greater image of meekness could there be than a formerly paralyzed man or woman who could do nothing on their own, who is genuinely powerless in the world, and to say, hey, now you've been healed, you get the whole world.
That's that whole concept of learned helplessness, right? So even now that they're healed, they have a whole lifetime of having been passed by on the streets and overlooked and having to just shrink into the shadows. And you're still a meek individual, even if you're healed.
Yeah. But okay. In case we never do it, can I just go ahead and read the Beatitudes?
Yeah, we probably should. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I have to tell you, the minute I start to read, I immediately jump back to a conversation with my son from literally earlier today, in which we were talking about different biblical narrators that you can listen to on the Bible app and how they all have these deep, beautiful, rolling voices. And so I want to be able to read this like, and he opened his mouth and taught them saying, but I just don't think I can keep it up.
I sure hope you don't.
So in my far more ordinary voice, here we go.
All right.
He opened his mouth and taught them saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Yeah. So by my reckoning, we have 8, maybe 9 types of people. We have the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, the peacemakers, And then the persecuted for righteousness and then the persecuted for following Jesus, are they one and the same? I don't know. So 8, maybe 9.
Yeah.
So I get it on some of these, right? The down and outs, Dallas Willard quotes Paul Simon's line, "Blessed are the sat upon, spat upon, ratted on," which is a wonderful little line. And I get that for those who mourn, those who are meek, but peacemakers? That sounds like something you do, not that you just are. Poor in spirit? Actually, he does a good job of retranslating that. We'll get to that in a minute. But hunger and thirst for righteousness? Like, these aren't, like, people who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those aren't the sat upon, spat upon, ratted on. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, when I read this, my initial take is that the first 4 could be states of lack, which is sort of my mental summary of his argument. These are states of lack into which Jesus can act. So, is the poor in spirit a state of lack? Absolutely. Mourning, state of lack? Sure. The meek, a state of lack? Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. Hunger and thirst for righteousness? If by that we mean they are lacking in righteousness, sure, I can buy that. The first 4, states of lack.
Okay, all right.
The second 4, however, it's just rough to argue that the merciful, especially if the thing they have is the thing they're going to get, I think that that is a countercultural statement, but I do not think it is a statement about lack. To value mercy is awesome.
Right. So, yeah, the way Dallas Willard makes this like the least of these kind of a category is to say the merciful, those are the people that everybody takes advantage of because they're just too kind to everybody. And so they just get steamrolled in this world. Really? I don't know. That just doesn't add up to me. Nor does his pure in heart. His pure in heart, he takes that to be like self-righteousness or like these are the people for whom nothing is ever good enough. And they're constantly critical of everybody else. And they find sin everywhere, even in themselves. So their reward is, or the good news for them is that they will see God, finally, an image of perfection. But that just doesn't seem to add up to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like the image that you suggested early on of Jesus walking through the crowd and blessing the people that he is in the process of healing and declaring them to be the blessed. Especially in Jewish culture, it's certainly tough to claim that the pure in heart were not insiders. Now, all of Dallas Willard's arguments seem theoretically possible, but I would have to be like really shown where the words meant those things. Right? When we say the pure in heart, do we really mean the people who are just dissatisfied with the purity of the external world? They're pure in heart because nothing else is pure. I agree with you. That just seems rough. So, I mean, take that one, for example. Blessed are the pure in heart. It almost feels to me like the first 4 were this is who you were, and the second 4 is this is who you get to be to these people who are broken. To say to somebody who just had a disease or was possessed 5 minutes ago, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And to realize I'm the person who hungered and thirsted for righteousness, and suddenly I get to be pure in heart. It just feels to me like there's a turn there in the middle.
Huh. That's super interesting. I actually read all 8, I'm going to call them 8, of these in one big light. Not 4 and 4, but all 8 having to do with one simple thing. And for me, the linchpin comes later in verse 20, where Jesus says, your righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And I think if we read all 8 of these as opposite of the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, then I think we see a whole different light to this list. So poor in spirit, These are the people who recognize their lack. Those who mourn, this is the people who deeply care about others and are sad and mournful. They're just not the high and mighty. Meek, again, the same, like not high and mighty. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, not like visible righteousness, but like true righteousness, being made right by God. Merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, those who are persecuted for their righteousness. I feel like this is a list that contrasts against the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees.
That is not something that ever occurred to me, but I feel like that is a mic drop moment. I'm like, okay, yeah, absolutely. That seems like the most logical explanation. Jesus is offering a contrast. Specifically, I think I like this in the context of the healed crowds, the people who could never aspire to be a scribe or a Pharisee, but who could aspire to this different and greater righteousness that Jesus is offering, that is now both, looking at the broader context of the Sermon on the Mount, this righteousness that he's talking about is superior to the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees on its own terms and on different terms.
Yeah. I like what you said earlier about the first four in terms of recognizing their lack. And this is where the good news of the kingdom shows up for these people. They recognize their lack, and Jesus is more than adequate to supply all that they lack. And blessed are those who genuinely are pure in heart, who desire peace, who are merciful. They hunger and they thirst for righteousness. These are the people who are just genuine about a desire for God and to follow God. And Jesus is showing up and saying, yes, that is what I will bless. Not this external righteousness. I'm going to bless this, and I'm going to fill up all that you lack. The kingdom of heaven is here, and it is here for these types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another thing, kind of the contrast between the scribes and Pharisees in this list, another unifying reality is the fact that there is no pride in any of these people.
Right.
Whether they are authentically pure in heart or merciful or peacemakers or meek or mourning or poor in spirit, whatever it is, they're not prideful.
They couldn't be.
No.
In their society, this is where the line really does come in. These are the sat upon, spat upon, ratted on.
Yeah. There's almost a snowballing feel because the third to last one, the pure in heart, certainly the scribes and Pharisees would have considered themselves that. But I love the fact that Jesus, adds in heart. He will eventually critique them for being pure on the outside and not on the inside.
Right. Using that same word, by the way, that word for pure is going to be used in both.
Okay. So he is making the point. This isn't about behavior. This is first about something internal. But then in order to make sure, I love the fact that that's later on in the list, because it's sort of, you start with the poor in spirit, those who are mourning, and even if this is just mourning, there are a lot of friends of diseased, sick, broken, hurting people. And you have gone through a situation where you've cared for a sick person.
Yeah.
How'd you feel at the end?
Oh man, that's too complicated to state, but mourning sure covers it.
And it's this sort of gross, heavy feeling, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something beautiful about starting there rather than, by the time you get to pure in heart, the picture that Jesus is painting with these fills out.
Yeah. So I come back to the original question. Is this a moral mandate saying this is how you ought to be? Or is this the good news of the kingdom reaching even to the least of these? And I think the answer is both. This is the middle ground, right? But I think these are the people that recognize their lack and long for the things of God and want to actively participate in the things of God, and God shows up for those people in those ways.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. If you cut out the crowd and the Pharisees, and you know what, this is really about the fact that God loves people.
You need to define that. That gets used a lot as, this is the central idea of Christianity. So all we have to do is just love people, full stop, no definitions involved.
Sure. Well, my favorite thing about this is that God's response to each of these is different. The Beatitudes would be very different if it was, blessed are the poor in spirit, for God will love them. Blessed are those who mourn, for God will love them. Blessed are the meek, for God will love them. The fact that the love of God is uniquely tailored to the desperate longings of the heart of each of these groups of people is profound to me in and of itself, regardless of whether it is the broken crowd, the opposite of the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, whatever. On some level, maybe it's God himself that is the opposite of the scribes and the Pharisees in this moment. The scribes and the Pharisees who are distancing themselves from all of these people, the scribes and the Pharisees who are judging all of these people, the scribes and the Pharisees who judge by outward appearances, who say everybody's a bad person and nobody's good enough and all of those things, where there is only a spark of longing for goodness. God is going to fan that spark into flame because he cares about who you can become, because he cares about who you long to be, because he sees those deep longings of your heart, because he sees those desperate needs that are covered by the brokenness of you and other people. But he sees. I mean, as much as this is a statement about the blessed, I think this is a statement about the God who blesses.
Yes, again, this is another great contrast with the Pharisees, right? God blesses these folks when the Pharisees would disregard them, right? Those who are spiritually lacking, God is going to bless. Those who are mourning, those who are meek, those, like I skip down to pure in heart. Well, they don't have their act together. They certainly don't have, all of the external righteousness of the Pharisees, so they just don't matter. But they're pure in heart. They are eagerly desiring righteousness. God sees that, and God cares about that. And the Pharisees disregard it because it's not external perfection. I find that to be a really fascinating corollary. Like, I think the Pharisees are contrasted against God, and their righteousness is contrasted against the righteousness that God actually blesses.
Yeah. And again, I think this is where Jesus as a teacher is so brilliant. There are so many layers of truth that his teaching forces you to discover if you continue to take the time. And it's not like if you discover one or the other, you have found the truth. The fact of the matter is that there is truth to mine in the depths of what Jesus is saying beyond anything we've found so far. And so every layer of it is true.
Yeah, exactly. I think before we started recording, we talked about what it was like in our 20s and how we thought we had a grasp on certain passages of the Bible and might teach them kind of at a more surface level. But as we have grown and as we have studied and all of these things, we teach that same passage in a different way because we've discovered new layers of truth to it that aren't visible on the first pass or the second pass, right? You have to really spend some time digesting that truth before those other layers start to become apparent. And then it just makes you hungry for, okay, what else is here? What else have I missed all this time? And it's all true. It just, you have to sit with it longer and longer and longer to uncover all those layers.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm incredibly grateful for this. This is one of the things I love about Jesus is that he is so much wiser than I am that it's not like I ever come to the end of a lesson.
Yeah.
Though I have to say, on a somewhat lighter note, all I can think about is Monty Python and Blessed are the Cheesemakers. It's all I can think about.
I was
And
thinking about that before we started recording. That's
I
hilarious.
I had to work it in somewhere. And this is the least inappropriate spot because I kept wanting to say it in the middle of some of our profound moments. But as we're kind of getting ready to wrap up here, anyway, I had to throw that in there because I can't not think about it. But,
All right. All right.
but
I guess
yeah.
it's time to turn to the audience. We have nothing more. We can't go up from here.
No, I've ruined the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, cheesemakers, what do you think of this passage? What stands out to you about the Beatitudes? And do you read it as a moral directive, something you should aspire to? Or is this good news to the least of these? Or do you see some other middle ground that we've not talked about here? We'd love to know more about it. And we'd love for you to share this episode with a friend and have your own conversation about what in the world does this mean?
Yes, exactly.
Well, this is our Summer in the Psalms series, and I am excited to hear from you, Josh from Missouri. What stuck out to you in our Psalms reading this week?
I just love, as often we are pointing out this year, certain ways that Peterson translates things. This is from Psalm 62 in the first couple of verses. And Psalm 62 in the ESV, verse 2 says, "He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken." In the Message, he uses this wonderful phrase, "He's the solid rock under my feet, breathing room for my soul." And he uses this phrase in chapter 61 and in chapter 62 to translate this idea of refuge, I think is the idea that he's translating. And I am caught by this image. I am caught by, in the chaos and busyness of everyday life, in the weight and pressures of work and family and church and friends, how often my soul needs breathing room and how I may feel selfish for wanting it, and yet it is a gift God is wanting to give me.
That really highlights the idea of a refuge, right? I think of somebody who's being chased and pursued, and they duck into this fortified structure and they hide out, and their breathing is really heavy, and they're trying to calm down because they're finally safe, and they finally know that the bad guy can't get them, and all of a sudden there's breathing room. I think that's a cool way to describe a refuge.
Yeah, I love it. I just thought it was, again, as so often with Peterson, I appreciate the fact that he is highlighting something in the text that I am not necessarily catching or that is emotionally not connecting with me.
Right.
Yeah. But what about you? What stuck out to you this week in the reading?
So this week, my reflections do not involve Peterson.
Oh,
I know. Actually, so it's interesting. You and I are not only doing the Summer in the Psalms series, but on the side, we are reading Revelation and recording some episodes on Revelation that will be released in the fall. And I knew at some point the reading of Revelation and the reading of Psalms would intersect. And it did for me this week.
ooh.
So I want to start with the Revelation passage. This is Revelation 18, and this is where Babylon has fallen, and all of the merchants of the world who did all of their trade through Babylon, through Rome, Babylon just being a description of Rome. So Rome has fallen, and all of the merchants of the world are like, well, crud, that's where all of our livelihood came from. What are we going to do now? And, John in Revelation really goes to great lengths to list all of the different goods that passed through Rome that will no longer be passing through Rome. So this is starting in verse 11. It says this, "And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron and marble, cinnamon, spices, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves. That is, human souls. It is just this lengthy list of all the quote-unquote benefits or goods that came through Rome. And now, how are we going to get them? Obviously, I see very much of our consumer mentality here represented. But then I contrast that with the Psalms reading, and this is really fascinating. So this is 65, starting in verse 9, and this is talking about what God does to provide for all of the earth. And so here it is. You visited the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain so that you have prepared it. You water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with abundance. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. This is joyful abundance throughout the earth because God made it so. He made all of this provision, and he will continue to do so. Even if Rome falls, God is still God, and his ways are still abundant and provision for the earth. It was so good.
The contrast of those is beautiful. I recently have read both of those, of course, and wow, that's just amazing. I hadn't caught that. That is such a cool contrast.
Yeah. And it actually kind of makes me think of, I love country living and would love to live a more simple country-oriented life. And so I see a lot of these types of things on Facebook, and, sometimes you just see like this lone cabin in the middle of a verdant forest, and then it just says, this is what, consumerism has stole from you, or something like that. Not that that's what the Bible is trying to teach exactly, but at the same time, I don't know, there's something about that abundance that God provides that is just so much richer than this consumerist culture that we depend upon so strongly.
That is a really incredible thought. Wow.
And now it's time to ruin it.
It's something that is very consumerist even.
Yes, exactly. And so that is this week's Which Josh question, which is, which Josh is married to a YouTube sensation?
Ooh, and this is me. I love this, and this is the funniest thing ever.
I didn't know you were married to Mr. Beast.
Yes. Well, and let us be timely and congratulate Mr. Beast on officially having taken the #1 spot in terms of YouTube subscribers. That happened just last week or the week before. He is #1 with a 16.3 bazillion, whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Good for him.
My son was watching that avidly, enjoying the fact that Mr. Beast was up and coming. But no, my wife is certainly not quite that much of a YouTube sensation. However, her most highly watched video has 31,000 views, which I think is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's great. We would love to have that kind of traffic.
Right, absolutely. And of course, it gets even better when I tell you what it is. Are you ready to hear what the name of that video is?
I'm sure it's very YouTube sensationally.
Yes, it is. And I quote, using multivariate statistics, logistic regression.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah, this is so when she was in her doctoral program, my wife started making videos for her classmates. It kind of talking through some of the assignments that they had to do, some of the stats stuff that they needed to understand. And she was the only one explaining certain things. And she is an incredibly gifted teacher. And so her videos are literally the only place sometimes you can go on the internet for certain things. And so she has like the one that I read to you, and then this other one that is like Marriage and Family Theories, CES Comps Review, Ethics and Current Issues in Counseling, CES Comps Review. Both of those have, like, one has 12,000 views, one has 7,000 views. Then you get into the high, the more pop stuff like Using Multivariate Statistics, Manova and Mankova. I don't even know what those words mean.
I don't either. But if any of our audience has had their interest piqued and wants to watch some of these most riveting videos, we will leave a link in the description for you to watch about multivariate statistics.
I think it's multivariate, not multivariant. There's no N. Multivariate.
Wow. I don't even know how to pronounce the words.
No, I don't either. And my wife, who typically listens to our episodes while she's kayaking, will, I'm sure, text me from kayaking to let me know if I pronounced it right.
Consider my text having been received.
All right, there we go.
All right. Well, should we pronounce the words better next week?
Yes, let's do that. Next week it is.
All right. Talk to you then.
All right. Bye.